What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Daniel here from the GeekSpeakNation channel, and I'm here to bring you my review of HBO's film, Bad Education. So, Bad Education is based off true events in which Hugh Jackman plays as a superintendent who gets embroiled in an embezzlement scandal involving school funding for, I think, what ended up being the cost of like $11 million or something like that, like something absolutely insane. And how a high school student at the student newspaper ended up exposing these wrongdoings, which is absolutely fantastic. And that's the original premise that this whole entire film was based on. And I gotta admit, this film was really interesting, but it had a couple flaws that prevented it from being truly great. Like it was right there, like on the cusp, but didn't quite hit the mark for just like one or two reasons. But I definitely have to say one of the standouts that really bring things home for this film are definitely going to be the performances. Ray Romano, Hugh Jackman, all of them, the whole entire cast in general really does do a good job of getting you invested and getting you to understand their mindset with very little background information. No matter where you kind of grew up at or what type of neighborhoods you were kind of in, you've definitely seen these type of people before, or at least these sorts of adults who take incredible amounts of pride in their self-image and, you know, their whole entire, you know, legacy and all that sort of stuff in their community. So they encapsulated that sort of environment very well. And as someone who grew up near that sort of environment, I can attest that it is highly accurate in that regard in those performances. Like I said, those are definitely the standouts of the film. I think they're absolutely incredible. And the writing is good as well. The dialogue is good. Although sometimes you can get a little bit whisper acting to it where people are just kind of like, come on, are you serious? And then it's like, okay, I can't quite hear what you're saying. And that's not an issue of the sound mixing department. That was a directorial / actor's choice. So that's like, that kind of interferes with the performances sometimes. But beyond that, generally, I'd say the chemistry that the cast had, the interactions, when people were clashing, you really felt it. And then you felt the intensity of when people were catching on to one another. And so I think that overall aspect of it was very well orchestrated. I'd say my gripe with the film that ends up being its greatest strength at the same time is the film's momentum. And what I mean by that is the pacing in which these scenes are going by is the most important thing, right? Especially when you have this kind of like based on a true story expose sort of thing. A good example of this is The Big Short, right? Where they did the film with Steve Carell and all of them about the housing crisis. But the important thing that director Adam McKay did is that he kept momentum through it. So that no matter if you did know the true story or if you did not know the true story, you can still follow along with the story that's being told, and it gives you a great momentum and it gives you something to follow along with, and you can completely understand where the story's going, and it feels like it's ramping up to something, and it keeps you invested and it keeps you intrigued, especially when the subject matter oftentimes may not be, you know, as exciting as, you know, oh goodness, you know, when the housing market crashed or something like that. But when you look back at it and you're able to pace it out correctly, if it works for your film, it works for your film, and you're able to get that momentum going, and you can make any small scale story feel like the world is collapsing in on your characters. And my problem with the film is that through the directing, it's able to gain that momentum in parts. There are parts and strides where the story starts to come together and people start to piece things together, or people start to have confrontations in the story. And the momentum inside of these scenes are great. It's riveting. You're locked in with the performances. The camera work is going by very well. It makes things feel almost like dreamlike or dream-esque and with this intensity to it. I absolutely adore it in that fashion. And I think it really comes together very well in that regard when the story is kicking up. My problem with it is momentum-wise, the story does not know what to do with itself, or at least the directing of the story does not know what to do with itself during the downtime. when no investigation is happening, where it seems like the bad guys are getting away with things, when things are slowing down and they try to explore the personal lives of some of the cast members, that's when the story loses me, because it's not keeping that same momentum. And it's not to say that you can't have those scenes in there and it still plays a part in developing the overall, you know, just kind of mental complexity of these characters, but at the same time it has to be done in a way that fits into the overall speed at which you're carrying the film, and it has to be ramping towards something, especially if you want to keep your audience invested. And that was my number one thing, especially, and it felt like when a lot of scenes with Hugh Jackman's character, there's a lot of times where they try to humanize him and explore what he does outside of work or at school, and I didn't have necessarily an issue with the scenes. It was more so just how long they ended up taking to get to the point of where those scenes were trying to go. And I feel like if a lot of that just ended up getting sped up a bit more, then certain aspects that they were trying to hit home with Hugh Jackman's personal life, I would have felt would have had more of an impact if they kind of kept up that momentum, so that when more reveals came out about who this man truly was and the things that he was doing, it would be like, whoa, that's crazy. And it kind of have more of an emotional impact in it as well. So I'd say that's like my number one gripe with the film. Momentum, your pacing, all that sort of stuff is a crucial part of your movie. And I don't necessarily see this as a fault of the I don't see this as a fault of the editing or the writing or the acting. I feel so this is a more so a directorial choice, from these long establishing shots to these kind of like ethereal following and tracking shots going into certain sequences that end up being ethereal in a sense, or like almost these like dream-esque sequences. It doesn't quite fit the overall vibe or aesthetic of this film when you do something that's kind of almost Bronson-esque. So that was just kind of like my overall gripe with it, and I feel like that's what held it back from being this rewatchable great movie. Like, oh, you haven't seen Bad Education? It's a good movie, you gotta go see it. It's got great performances, the story is great, you're locked in the whole time. There's plenty of times in this movie where I ended up checking my watch. I'm like, oh man, how much longer is this gonna end up taking? But overall, I still say regardless, this is a really, really solid film, a really well-made film, and overall a really good film. Just because something is not great or doesn't have a certain level of rewatchability doesn't mean a movie is not worth watching. I still think this movie is definitely worth watching, and especially just for the knowledge of understanding what really went down. And always with historical stuff, I always recommend that you end up doing your own research afterwards about what was and was not real, in case certain things were skewed or different perspectives were given in order to, I don't know, kind of make characters look more appealing and make them more archetypal for a film or a piece of literature or a piece of art or something like that. But with that being said, overall, I do give this movie a recommendation. I think it's worth a watch, especially if it's during the quarantine, you ain't got nothing to watch. Go ahead and pop on this movie. I say it's a good time, definitely worth watching. Not great, but overall, I'd still say I'd want to see more from this director and see what more this director is capable of and what they can do in their future. Performances are great though. With that being said, guys, that's my overall review, my overall thoughts on Bad Education. Let me know what you thought of the film, if you've seen it, in the comment sections down below, and give it this video a like if you enjoyed the review. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Daniel, and don't forget to get geeky.